Okay, Steve. Thank you, Steve, for inviting me. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. My name's Polly Pistol, and I'm an alcoholic. And by God's grace, in a program called Alcoholics Anonymous, I haven't had a drink since April the 11th of 1977. And for that, I am eternally grateful. I have a home group, that's the West Connect group in Jacksonville, Florida. I have a sponsor. My sponsor has a sponsor, and I sponsor, and the women I sponsor, and the women they sponsor, and so on and so forth. And I'm an active member in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm so glad to be here. My goodness, this is a big meeting. So congratulations, Steve. This looks like you got a lot of people coming on this meeting. So I'm very, very honored to be here. Thank you for having me. The Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous tells me that I should share in a general way what it used to be like, what happened, and what I'm trying to be like today. And I'm going to do that to the very best of my ability. And I want to start out by saying, if having a bad childhood is part of being an alcoholic, then I shouldn't be here. Because what has happened for me is I had a very good childhood. I was very loved. I was a cherished child. And not only that, I'm an only child. But whatever was wrong with me, whatever is in me, it's been there all the time. Even when I was a little girl, there was just something wrong with me. I was just dissatisfied. I was restless, irritable, and discontent. It just seemed like nothing was okay for me. And one of the things that happened is my parents were not wealthy. My dad was a contractor. He had a ninth grade education. My mother was a nurse and she worked. In a few months, I'm going to be 80 years old. And when I was a little girl, mothers didn't work. And I was ashamed that my mother worked. I was embarrassed that she worked, and I didn't want her to work. But my parents worked and sacrificed to give me everything any little girl would ever want to have. And they would give me dancing lessons, gymnastic lessons. My mother would make my costumes. She'd make my evening gowns that I had for school, and she'd make my clothes. She was a beautiful seamstress. But what would happen is I would tell her, I don't want you to make my clothes. I want to buy clothes like other little girls. So I was that little girl, but there was just this thing in me. And the other big book, it talked about there's nothing worse than an ungrateful child. It just seemed like nothing satisfied me. Also, I want to talk about how I was brought up, because I also believe when I give an AA talk that you should understand when I get through talking, because the big book tells me that on page 29, that you should know that I have a higher power. And I should have made that clear that I have a higher power. And what I want to talk to is my journey to God and Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, when I came here, I knew there was a God. I believed in God. I just didn't believe in the God that I have today, because I was raised Southern Baptist. And I think this is coming out of Virginia. And if it comes out of Virginia, that's considered part of the South. And I have a feeling people know what Southern Baptist is. I know now that I live in in Florida, they know. When I lived in California and when I lived in Birch Bay, Washington, they didn't really know what that meant. But I was raised Southern Baptist. And it seemed like they were always talking about this God, that you're born a sinner and you're going to burn in hell and you're going to pay for your sins, and thou shalt not drink. And I didn't. All I believed, though, was that I never, ever would be good enough for God. And I can tell you, my mother even used to say, we live in a God-fearing home. And that's just exactly what it was. I feared God. I did not have anything like the relationship that I have with God today. But I think God is so magnificent that along our lifespan, he presents times and people in our life that helps us to grow spiritually. And I truly believe the God of my understanding is not here to punish me, that the things that have happened to me in my life are just lessons that I've needed to learn. My second sponsor, and I'll talk a little bit about her too, but my second sponsor used to say, Polly, life is just a spiritual classroom. We're just here to learn whatever lessons we have to learn in this lifetime. And that's truly the way I feel about God today. And I don't have any idea why we're all in this situation that we're in right now with this pandemic. And all of the other stuff that's going on in our country. I don't understand why all that's happening. But I can see for me, I don't know if anybody else can, but I can see the goodness that has already come out of this. One of the things I can tell you is my husband's been sick for 5 years, and Zoom has put me back in touch looking at, God, I can't even remember when the last time is I saw Steve. It's been a long time ago. And what happens is because of Zoom, I'm getting to see people on Zoom that I haven't seen in years, and I love it. And I think this takes place in Tennessee. It's Tennessee, right? Tennessee, not Virginia, Tennessee. This is taking place in Tennessee. And I'm in Tennessee, and I didn't even get on an airplane. I just sat down at my kitchen table, and I'm talking to all of these people. Right now, there's 409 of you on Zoom. And that's a lot of people gathered up, and I got on 15 minutes early, and we just started firing in here, just one by one. It's the miracle. And I think God is so wonderful. What if this would have happened 10 years ago? We wouldn't be here. And we were only down, I don't even think a week before Zoom was going. And we've had the first coronavirus conference or the Corona conference. I don't know what it was, but we were on right there. I never even heard of Zoom. And here we were, the middle of March, and we were on. It's amazing. It is amazing. Well, what happened is at 18 years old, I married an Air Force officer. And I just knew I had found my knight in shining armor, and we were going to sail off into the sunset and live happily ever after. Well, I had married an Air Force bomber pilot. And I didn't have any idea what I signed up for. I knew nothing about what my life was going to be. But what I was going to learn that he was going to be gone, and he was going to be gone for years at a time. And I was going to have to be responsible for myself. And I ended up having 2 little boys, and I was going to have to be responsible for them too. And I really had no idea how to do that. And what happened is our first duty station was Sacramento, California. And he'd gone out there to do training for B-47s. So if there's any Air Force people on here, you know that was a long time ago. And he had gone there for training, and we hadn't been there but maybe 2 weeks. And I got this invitation in the mail from the base commander's wife. And it had a big red mandatory stamped on it. And I opened it up, and I was invited to a coffee that she was giving. And I was terrified. I had those feelings that I hear almost every alcoholic talk about. I had those feelings. I'm 18 years old. I just know that these women are educated and sophisticated, and I'm none of those things. And I'm going to this coffee, and I'm so intimidated. That's always kind of the feeling I always had, of just those feelings of intimidation, of not quite, I just didn't measure up. So I went to this coffee, and all of us little second lieutenant's wives were sitting around in tables in this dining area, and she was standing up at a podium. and she was addressing all of us. And she began to tell us what our responsibility would be to enhance our husband's career, how we would attend all the military functions, how we would attend all the officers' wives' clubs functions, how we would dress appropriately, how we would have the right dinner parties, we would go to the right dinner parties. And I'm telling you, when that coffee was over, I went directly to a bookstore to get a book on etiquette. I'm a hick from Texas. We just sit down and eat. I mean, I had no idea what I had signed up for. And a couple of weeks later, there was an officer's wives luncheon. And of course, I'm going to attend because I'm expected to attend. I have the same feelings of just inadequacy and really nervous and, you know, not knowing, just always afraid I wasn't going to say the right thing. And people who know me, I still don't get words out right. And I get them close enough that you know what I'm talking about, but they just don't come out right. And I've always had that problem since the beginning of time. At any rate, I go to this luncheon that day, and I see all these ladies around, and there's a long table. And at the table, on one end of the table is all these little glasses lined up, and there's this big fountain, and it's got this liquid coming out of it. And I see these ladies pick up a glass, and I see them put it under that fountain. And I want to tell you, my first drink was a really wussy drink. And I picked up a glass just like they did, and I put it under that fountain. Now that drink is so imprinted in my mind. Now I didn't know I needed to remember that drink. I didn't know that I would always remember that drink. And when I talk about it, I can even feel it. And I still remember how warm it was. And it just sort of went all the way down to my belly button. And it seemed like I could just breathe. It seemed like I had been holding my breath for 18 years. And I took my glass and I put it back up under that fountain. And I took another drink. Now, I didn't get drunk that day. I don't even know if I got even high. I know that I got very relaxed. And I know that I've always been an uptight person. I'm still an uptight person. I just am one of those kind of people that's very energetic, you know, just always wanting, it's just always on the, you know, gotta hurry, let's go, intense. And that's just the kind of person I am. And I was worse then. I mean, I was a kid. I was 18 years old. Sometimes I can't even believe now that I look at 18 and my grandchildren, I think, I mean, they're in their 20s and I think 18 was so young. And I was 18 years old. But what I didn't know that day is that how relaxed I had felt. I didn't know that day that my life had been altered forever. Because what's in there and what we read in the doctor's opinion about the allergy, I don't know if I have an allergy like to strawberries or what. All I know is I have this thing inside of me, and Dr. Silkwood calls it an allergy. I have this allergy, and you put alcohol in me, and I react differently. And the book tells me I am mentally and bodily different from my fellows. And whatever makes me mentally and bodily different from my fellows happened that day. And that drink is still imprinted in my brain. And I knew that day I would do that again. And I had all of those years, those preachers were screaming their lungs out to thou shalt not drink. And what happened is I didn't start getting fallen down drunk, and my alcoholism had just kind of like just a progression. I mean, when the book talks about a progressive illness, I get it. That's the way it happened for me. My son, when he started using at 15 years old, it seemed like he was there that day. It just seemed like he had it instantly. Mine was a more gradual thing because I did take I did take pills as well. I had been given, again, like I told you, really uptight. And Air Force doctors would give you all kinds of tranquilizers and barbiturates, but they didn't want you to upset the jock. So I did take those and drink on top of them. And at first, it was just a drink when we went out. And then it was a drink before dinner. And then it was a drink with dinner. And then it was drinks after dinner. And as the disease progressed, I had these two little boys. And by the time my sons were about 6 and 8 years old, I was a really full-blown alcoholic. Now, I am the alcoholic. I have never been to jail. I have never been arrested. I've never done any of those. I have not had those kind of experiences. But what I did was so shameful for me. And that is, I drugged those two little boys through the disease of alcoholism. And I was responsible for them. And what alcohol did to me is what's talked about in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It turned me into a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And when I would take a drink of alcohol, I would become mean, I would begin to scream, I would become abusive to my sons. And what alcohol did to me is it made me a child abuser. It not only made me a child abuser, I was a neglectful mother. I could no longer take care of my children. I got to the point I could not put them to bed. I could not get them up for school. I absolutely could not take care of my children. That's what alcohol did for me. That's what it did to me. And what would happen is I would come to, I'd see what I'd done, and I was so horrified. The only way I could even stand myself was I would end up taking another drink. I had no idea how alcohol had done all this to me. And it seemed like, and see, I knew nothing about the phenomena of craving. And I would go out to dinner or somewhere when we had to go out, socially. And what would happen is it was not acceptable for an Air Force officer's wife to be drunk and disorderly. And I can tell you, I have sat an evening holding a drink so intense, the hair on the back of my neck just standing up, and I needed a drink so bad. And when I would get home, I would just fall on my knees in front of the liquor cabinet and just take a bottle and just turn it up. I had to stop the craving. And I didn't know any of that until I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I read the big book, and I read the doctor's opinion, and it began to tell me. And I can tell you that day at that Air Force officers' luncheon, officers' wives' luncheon, when I took that drink, it was exactly as Dr. Silkworth had described. I got that feeling of ease and comfort at once by taking a few drinks. And that's what alcohol did. That was what alcohol was doing for me. And I was powerless. I was absolutely powerless over that drink. I was powerless not to hurt my children. I was powerless. And the things I did to my children have left terrible scars. But what I know today is that this program works. And probably the most amazing thing with this program, and I have been so blessed, and I am the benefactor of that, is the gift of forgiveness. This program has given me that. And I'd just like to tell you, and the other thing, one more thing. And also, by the time my sons were 10 and 12, my husband had been medically retired. And he was retired from the Air Force, and he was 100% disabled. He was 36 years old, and he had contracted congestive heart failure that we are pretty sure that he contracted from Agent Orange. No way you can prove it, but he spent the last year of his military career in Da Nang. At the end of the Vietnam War, he was an advisor on ground. He had come out of the cockpit. And what had happened is he, at 36, had congestive heart failure, and his heart was enlarged so much that he could hardly breathe and could hardly walk across the floor. And of course, this was in the 70s. This was before heart transplants and all of the things that we have today. And what had happened is he was 100% disabled, and I was unable to care for him. My sons did most of his care. The other thing is my daddy he was in Abilene, Texas, and he was dying from colon cancer. And this was at the end of my drinking, the last few months of my drinking. He was in a hospital in Abilene, Texas. And I couldn't get there because I was so drunk, and I'm his only child. And all of these things were I was just horrified. And I can tell you today that I worked the program of Alcoholics Anonymous with everything I have, everything, because I know she sits right here. And I know if I rest on my laurels that she can show up again. And I know the big book tells me I only get a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition. And I'm here to tell you, whatever this program asks of me, I will do, because I never, ever want her to show up again. What happened was I had a car wreck, not a serious car wreck, but I had a car wreck, and my husband said, Polly, there's a treatment center. It's not far from my house, and I wish you would go. And that night, I entered treatment for the first time. And it was a detox center. And I didn't know anything about, I'm here to tell you, I came to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I did not even know another alcoholic. I knew nothing about the disease of alcoholism. I knew nothing. I had seen the Days of Wine and Roses and I'll Cry Tomorrow, but I didn't know anything about that. I entered this detox center, and they gave me this wonderful medicine. And the next afternoon, this was in the evening, the next afternoon I woke up. I went into the day room. There's all these people sitting around. They were through with the groups or whatever they were doing. And everybody started telling these war stories. And I know if you've ever been to detox or treatment, you know, people sit around and tell their war stories. So they were telling these stories, and I'm not saying anything. And first of all, there's people there who are divorced. There's people there who've been to jail. There's people there who've been to prison, and they all cuss like sailors. I'm here to tell you, when I went to that detox center, I didn't even say the F word. Now, I'm really good at it today, but I didn't say it then. And I was just looking at all those people, and I looked around and I said, I am not like these people. I'm not like these people. And my husband says, only an alcoholic can lay in the gutter feeling superior to those looking down on him. And that's what I was. And I was saying nothing. I was not going to talk about how I abused my children, how I couldn't take care of my husband, how I couldn't show up for my dad. I'm not about to tell any of those things because, see, I haven't had any of those. And they were talking about their affairs and things they did. And I didn't do any of that. I didn't do that until I got to treatment and in sobriety. I didn't do any of that. I did all that stuff when I was sober. And I was in that treatment center, and I ran off with this guy for 58 days. In the detox center. That's what happened. And I ended up being 12-stepped out of a motel in Euless, Texas, and brought back into that treatment center. And I'd been beaten up and numerous other things. And now I have so much shame to add to this other shame that I know for sure. I can so understand when Clancy says sobriety was my problem. Sober, I can't live with this. Sober, I can't face who and what I am. How do you do that? What kind of person does what I do? What kind of person abuses her children? What kind of person doesn't take care of her husband or see her father? What kind of a person runs in detox, has an affair, and ends up in a very compromising situation? How does a person do that? A person who's alcoholic and powerless over alcohol, and their life is unmanageable. And I was in this treatment center, and I knew there was no way I could live sober. But I stuck out that 7 days. And when that 7 days was up, I got a bottle of scotch, and I got a bottle of Valiant, and I checked into a motel. I don't think that there's anybody on this Zoom that doesn't have an angel in your life, someone who leads us to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I had such an angel in my life. And she knew nothing about the disease of alcoholism, but she loved me. And she said that day that something came over her. And I know today what that was. That was God working in my life through her. And she drove around and she found my car outside this motel. And I hadn't shut the door. I had just closed it, and she pushed it open. And she found me laying there and called 911. And on April the 8th of 1977, I was pronounced dead on arrival in a hospital in Bedford, Texas. Needless to say, I was resuscitated. But when you try to take your life, even in 1977, you get the attention of the authorities. I was put on a 72-hour hold, and I was carted off to a psychiatric hospital, which gave my husband enough time to obtain a court order from a Fort Worth judge that I was a detriment to myself and others, and I was court committed to treatment. I'm here to tell you, thank you, God, that God has interfered in my life so many times without my permission. I did not ask God to have Frank, who was the director of that treatment center, to go to that motel and save my life. I did not ask my friend to look for me because I had overdosed on alcohol and pills. I did not ask my husband. In fact, I was furious with him for months for what he had done to me by court committing me to this treatment center. But by God's grace, he has interfered in my life without my permission. And by God's grace, he continues to do that. He continues to be there for me, even though I don't know I need what I need. But God always knows what I need. And I entered that treatment center on April the 11th of 1977. And by God's grace in this program, I haven't had a drink since. I got into that program, and I had a very difficult detox because I was not allowed, as I put it, any medication or any tablets. And I was very much looking for that because I had detoxed twice before. But the director of that treatment center said that I needed to find out how sick I really was. And I got to experience how sick I really was. I pulled my hair out. I clawed my face. I know today what alcohol does to me. But while I was in that treatment center, they took us to meetings. We had people from the outside to come in, and I began to fall in love with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I want you to know that that love affair has never, ever, ever been anything but an amazing love affair. I have a love affair with Alcoholics Anonymous. I love this program with all my heart. I love it. I can't even tell you how much I enjoy this Zoom. I love AA so much. I'm on this all the time. I love it. I get to see people. I get to hear the word. I get to hear the steps. I get to hear people speak. I get to hear their stories. I get to experience Alcoholics Anonymous. And I love it with all my heart. And while I was there, they told me you need to get a sponsor. So I called Frank, who had been the director of this detox center, and asked him to be my sponsor. And he told me that he would. And he said, but Polly, I don't want to hear from you till you get out of treatment. Then I want you to be at my house the day you get out of treatment. That was my first sponsorship direction. That day I got out of treatment, and I was at his house. And I reported to him when I got there that I was on step 6. And because I had done my 5th step the day before in treatment. And he reported to me that treatment center psychobabble, you are on step 1. We are going to do the steps out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we did that, in a few days. And he lived very close to my house, so I saw him every single day. And I went to his house, and we did the steps. And by the time I was sober, I had been in that treatment center for 6 weeks. It was a 28-day treatment center that I was invited to stay for 6 weeks. And I stayed in that treatment center for 6 weeks. And then about 2 weeks out of that treatment, we had done steps 1, 2, and 3, and he had prepared me and given me the instructions for step 4, and I was ready to come to his house with step 5. And what I did not have but 5 things on my first inventory. I would have many things the years after. But my first inventory only had my husband, my mom and dad, the United States Air Force, and the Baptist Church. And my sons I had on harm's done because I had no resentment connected to my sons. And I gave him my 5th step. And he looked at me, and I can still see his face because he said it with love. But I heard something I couldn't bear. I'd always said I harmed my children. And he looked at me and he said, Polly, harm is not the word. You're a child abuser. And you need to go to your sons and you need to make amends to them. Now, when I got sober, my sons were 16 and 14 years old. And they had experienced and seen things and been neglected that no kid should ever see. And they certainly shouldn't see their mother in those kind of positions, in those kind of, the way they had, and they shouldn't have had to care for me or their dad the way they had to. They were little kids. And I didn't know, how do you do that? How do you do that? How do you go make amends for something like that? How do you do that? And he had me write out the amends on a 4x5, on a 3x5 card, everything that I could remember. And then he had me write another 3x5 card out, and it said, I'm so sorry that that happened to you. And I will spend the rest of my life being the very best mom I can be. I made amends to my sons both at the same time. I don't recommend that, but that's the way it was recommended to me. That happened a long time ago, and I think I learned a lot from the first time I came into AA. And I wouldn't do that. I don't recommend that with the women I sponsor, but that's the way I did it. And I went to my 2 sons, and I read my little 3x5 cards, and then I did just what the big book told me to do. And that's, I asked them if I had left out anything or if they had anything to say to me. And they began to just fire. They were so angry. They let me know how much I had embarrassed them, how ashamed of me they were. And they started telling me some of the things that I did. And I was so horrified. And I held my little card and I just kept reading my little card because I just didn't know what else to do. But I am so grateful that happened. I'm so grateful that my sons and I got to experience that day. Now, there's been many amends since then, but that was the first one. That was the first amends. When I got sober, I loved AA. I was in AA all the time. My sons were still taking care of their dad because now I'm going to meetings and I'm hanging out in AA all the time. I end up having a lot of affairs in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm 36 years old. It seems like my libido comes alive and I start bringing on all kinds of things and stress to myself. And what happens is that, again, I'm not able to take care of my husband. But what ends up happening is that I had a lot of inventory to do in the next couple of years because of my early behavior in Alcoholics Anonymous. But while I was doing this, I met a man and we became friends. And that's what we were. We were friends. He was my confidant and he was my friend besides the man that I had for a sponsor. And what happened is that Dave never had, I never had any hanky-panky with Dave. But what happened is Dave knew a lot of the men that I had hanky-panky with because he sponsored them. So he knew more about me than he needed to. But what happened is when I was 3.5 years sober, and he was 4.5 years sober, he came to me and he said, Polly, I'm in love with you, and I want to marry you. And by God's grace in this program, if Dave and I on October the 27th will be married 40 years. And I have been able to spend 40 years and walk this program with the man of my dreams. And Dave and I have had a life together. I can't even tell you how fabulous it's been. We've been able to travel the world because we drank too much whiskey. We just have got to travel the world and go to AA all over the world. I have had the privilege of sponsoring the finest women in Alcoholics Anonymous. I've had the opportunity of being able to share this program. I've been able to be with people who are dying. I've been able to go to people in treatment centers, in detox centers, and halfway houses. We have been able to share this program together. And this couple taught us when we were just a few years sober, maybe 5 or 6 years sober, and we had gone to a conference and we heard them do the traditions and relationships. And we asked them, take us through that. And we did that. And then we got to go all over the world talking about traditions and relationships and how Dave and I'm Dave's 4th wife. And I mean, I couldn't have a relationship. I couldn't do anything with my kid, with my husband. I couldn't be a mom. I couldn't be a wife. None of the things I could do. Alcoholics Anonymous has given me all of that. When I was 6.5 years sober, my youngest son called me on the phone. He was 21 years old. And he said, Mom, I want what you have. And my son and I have walked this program together for the past 36.5 years. James is 36.5 years sober, and he's one of the busiest men in Alcoholics Anonymous. He is an amazing member of this fellowship, and I am so grateful that we've been able to walk together. But life shows up. Just because we're sober doesn't mean life doesn't happen. 18 years ago, we lost Dave's oldest son, Mike. He died. And our daughter, Kim, we don't hear that much from her, but we do hear from her now, and she's sober. And it's been a long journey. My children have had a lot of problems because of the stuff that has happened to them when they were little bitty boys. But the healing has been amazing. And I have been able to sponsor women. I've been able to take women through this fellowship. I've been able to take them through these steps. I've been able to stand by them. I've been able to listen to 5th steps for them having a mother like I was. And I try to explain to them, I was your mother. I was that woman before the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was powerless. I was powerless. It is in this program that I came to believe the God of my understanding. And I was able to give my life, take these steps, find out what my character defects are, make my amends, and practice these steps every day in my life. That's what I've been able to do. But life shows up. Dave and I have been through, he lost his job in '93. We have been through bankruptcy. We've been through foreclosure. All of this we've done sober. My first grandchild, I couldn't even stand it. I was so excited when my first grandchild was born. And then we found out he was profoundly deaf. And I knew that his life was going to be ruined forever because of that. And I was so angry at God. How could you do this? How could that happen? But see, I didn't understand. I didn't understand that all of these things were totally necessary. My grandson is 27 years old today. He's a civil engineer. He builds bridges. And I'll guarantee you he's handicapped in no way. He is an amazing man. I have 5 grandchildren. And I met this lady when I was 3 years sober, and her name was Dottie Harris, and she was from Southern California. I didn't know the exact town. I just knew she was from Southern California. And she had touched my soul. I'd heard her speak at a conference. I was very new in sobriety. And I said, if I ever get to California, I'm going to look this woman up, because she had touched me so. I never dreamed that would ever happen. And when we were 5 years sober, Dave and I was 5 and he was 6, he got transferred to Southern California. And I no sooner got there that I called the intergroup office and I said, do you know a woman named Dottie Harris? And they did. They gave me her phone number. I called her, and she said, you meet me in Downey, California at the Big Book Group, and in Bellflower, California at the Big Book Group, and we can meet. And I did, and the next few days we had coffee, and I asked this lady to be my sponsor. And she was my sponsor for 33 years until the day she died. And she was amazing. And I can't even believe how God has his little brick road, because Frank, who was my first sponsor, was sponsored by a man named Frank Honeycutt. And Frank Honeycutt would become my husband's sponsor and my son's sponsor. And Frank Honeycutt and Dottie had gotten sober together. And Frank Fitzpatrick, who was my sponsor, had been a priest in the Navy, and he had been a captain in the Navy. And he also was an only child, and he had gotten sober at Long Beach Naval Hospital. How do you make this stuff up? It's just how God lays out our little brick road. And what Frank gave me when I was first sober is he told me, Polly, I am a priest, and I did not find God in the Catholic Church. I found God in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And Frank shared his God with me. And then I got with Dottie. And Dottie had this magnificent, loving, caring God that she shared with me. And she gave me her God. And she sponsored me until 5 years ago. And I now have a woman by the name of Rena. And she is an amazing example of this program. And she has what I want. I love the program she has, and she's drop dead gorgeous. I want everything she has. And the grateful thing I am is today, I am still sponsorable. I am still able to follow sponsorship direction. I have been given that gift. And I want to talk about some amazing gifts. I have 5 grandchildren, and Dottie used to talk about that we all get to have do-overs. And I've been able to be a grandmother to these 5 grandchildren. I've had a lot of fun with them. I've been through some growing pains. I've been through us finding out about Ryan's deafness. It has been a magnificent journey to have had these grandchildren in my life. The other thing that I have had happen, and this has happened in the last 5 years, I could never take care of my first husband. And I'm so grateful because he remarried 6 months after me. And he died 18 years ago. And because of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, him and his wife and all of us became very good friends. And he's been dead. But his wife is still my son's stepmother. And she has been a wonderful grandmother to my grandchildren. All of this happens because of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I had the privilege of getting to hear Chuck Chamberlain speak. I got the privilege of sitting in his living room. And I can remember Chuck talking about, we have one problem, and that's conscious separation from God and man. And we have one solution, and that's conscious contact with God and man. I have to repair all my relationships. All my relationships have to be repaired. And I'm so grateful that that has happened, and that has been allowed to happen in my life. And 5 years ago, my husband got really sick, and I have been able to be his caregiver, a 24/7 caregiver for the past 5 years. And I'm so privileged that I've got to have that do-over. And I'm so honored that I get to do that. And he's still the man of my dreams. And I'm so grateful that we've been able to be together, and we've been able to ride this pandemic out. And I mean, we get to do a lot of Zooms, and we get to share a lot of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it has been so, absolutely so amazing. Also, I have been so forgiven by my sons. I have been so forgiven. In fact, my youngest son, he and I were doing a family afterwards workshop. about, if I can stop this, now that I'm over with it. We did a family afterwards workshop, and I was talking, I had told my story, and my youngest son stands up there, and we did this workshop, and I had done my story on Saturday night, and this was Sunday morning. And he said, Mom, I am everything I am today because of everything that has happened to me. And everything that's had to happen to me is what I have needed in order to grow spiritually. So he looked over at me and he said, so get over it. So that's and the other thing I'd like to tell you really quickly is my oldest son turned 60 years old on May 9th. And today he has a year and a half in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. So if you're waiting and you've got a child or someone you love and you've waited and you waited, just know that it's never too late, that God's timing is always perfect. And I'm so grateful I got to live long enough, and I'm so grateful that both of my sons are in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we can share this journey together. And Steve, thank you for having me, and thank you for letting me share.